Hello everybody. Today's Dogman Bites story is narrated by Randolph Scourge. Mr. Crenshaw is taking a break as he has work to do on Whitehall Mountain. Mr. Scourge? When I was a kid, I lived in a neighborhood near an inner-city graveyard in the upper half of the lower peninsula of Michigan. I'm going to use fake names for the people because some of them went on to become important members of their respective communities. Tom, Bob, Gary, and I were hanging out one night, walking the streets and killing time near an abandoned strip mall a block from my house. The air was chilly, not close to freezing, but cool enough. Jacket weather, Mom called it. We tossed rocks and beat on junk with sticks, chased cats, ran from angry dogs and bigger kids. Fun stuff. We were around 10 or 12 years old at the time. Tom stopped. He pointed his stick at the far end of the parking lot where it turned the corner of the glass-fronted building and said, "Cop." One thing no one wanted was a run-in with the police. Most of us had been delivered to our parents at some point in our lives for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. My own incident happened last Halloween, a little more than a year ago. None of us wanted that ride home and the punishment that would follow. There would be grounding at the very least, and who knows what else. I could only guess what my dad would do. So, half ready to bolt in various directions, we came to a momentary halt. A man stood in the shadows under the trees that grew in a clump in the grass strip that ringed the parking lot. The street behind him, Parker Avenue, was not well lit, but there was one dull street lamp that cast a dirty yellow glow that silhouetted his figure. We figured it must be a man due to his size. We stood staring at each other for several seconds. And then this guy fell to his hands and ran out of sight around the corner of the building. We looked at each other. The way he moved, on his hands and feet, was really strange. It didn't look awkward or slow. It looked nimble and quick as hell. Without a word, we ran in the exact opposite direction, a well-practiced maneuver that any routed infantry squad would have recognized. We didn't stop until we got home. Out of breath and panting, we hung out on my front porch and discussed it for the rest of the night. We never saw anything like that ever again. Later, we made a game about visiting the back parking lot of the mall at night, the spooky place, where neighborhood refuse collected amid scraggly weeds and bushes sprouting from cracked asphalt, where there was said to be a porno stash guarded by a deformed, homeless man. A month later, a little boy that lived 2 miles from my home went missing. I had never met him, as that was just a little too far away for our gang. None of us knew him, and we came to refer to the incident as Missing Marky, although that was not his name. The disappearance was assumed to be an abduction, and it was in the news for weeks. They found Missing Marky's bike only a few blocks away from Bob's house, near a street flanked by closed businesses, low-rent apartments, and crack houses. The police searched the area and found nothing except drug dealers, drug users, and other assorted forms of lowlife. Later, due to community concerns, the city cleaned up that street, and for a time, not even the crack whores could be seen down that way. Eventually, they moved back, as they always do. By that time, we were older, and none of us took an interest in the hard drugs they offered. Weed and beer were enough for us. And besides, we had found more interesting things to do. One of us found a way into the old cemetery, thanks to an older brother. It was the perfect place to drink beer and smoke pot. The cemetery was trimmed in the front, but wild and overgrown deeper inside, where you couldn't see from the street. It reminded us of the cemetery in the movie The Return of the Living Dead, but we never got no girl to dance naked anywhere. We took dates there and messed around and did all kinds of stuff. It got to be a familiar place, like our own secret backyard. One weekend, when my friends were out of town, I grew bored and took a walk. It was the beginning of winter, and the air felt crisp and clean. A thin layer of fresh snow marked my tracks as I slipped between the iron fence and the masonry column that had once held it securely. I passed the Bernard Mausoleum and the Taylor headstones. My path led me between Thomas Caller and Amy West, the orderly gray knobs of the McAllister brood, and the squat stone tree of the Andrew Smith Monument, among others. All dead, all buried. I buried my loneliness in a six-pack I'd picked up earlier in the week and stashed in the garage under a pile of decaying National Geographic magazines. Dirty gray light filtered through the trees from the street lamps outside, making deep, dark shadows. Cracking a beer, I took a sip and raised it to the dead in a mock salute. White velvet frost grew on every flat surface around me. It was a beautiful, almost supernatural sight. As I grew accustomed to the scene, I grew bored and a little pissed. Interrupting the monochromatic beauty were unnatural objects. Candy bar wrappers, fast food containers, crumpled balls of paper sacks and magazines, newspapers, soda cups, plastic shopping bags, and more. I found a plastic shopping bag that didn't have any major holes and proceeded to stuff it with trash. After picking up the immediate area, I took a look at the Stockman crypt. We had turned the vestibule of the Stockman crypt, technically a mausoleum, into our personal garbage dump. The vestibule was a stone stairwell about 10 feet wide, composed of 6 steps leading downward into the side of a hill, ending at a small space in front of a large, sealed door. I judged the accumulated mess must have been at least 3 feet deep. Knowing a fair percentage of that litter was mine, I felt no pride at this accomplishment. I wondered what kind of rats made it their home. A dark streak led through the trash, like the shadow of a wake. Though it was coated with white frost, it was obvious something had moved through it. The thought made me pause. My first bag of trash was full. I put it aside and looked for another empty bag stuck in the roots of a bush or tree. It didn't take long to find one. Using a stick I'd found while looking for the bag, I started digging through the trash, kind of gauging how difficult it was going to be for me to clean up this much refuse. It was pretty deep. I was pretty sure there was trash in here none of us had dumped, and I was pretty sure I was going to give up this idea. That's when I found a $5 bill. The discovery gave me a big boost of energy, and I dug in earnest, examining everything for possible treasure. My stick broke, so I found a better one. The replacement was a little longer and heavier, and had a forked tip, which made digging more efficient. I started working up a sweat. The smell grew stronger the deeper I went. At some point I decided I'd work down to the concrete floor and call it quits if I didn't find anything else. Finally, my stick scraped against something hard, and I kicked away the trash until I felt bare, black floor. I decided I'd had enough for now. I sipped my third beer and caught my breath and felt the $5 bill in my pocket. Sitting on the top step, I looked at the garbage pit I'd made. Then I laughed at myself for working so hard. There was nothing there I was gonna find, just more garbage. I sparked up the pin joint I had in my pocket. Looking around, I soaked up the strange beauty of the place. It was quiet, and once again I found myself appreciating the macabre tranquility. After a beer and a few minutes of listening to far-off traffic noise, distant aircraft, and the crackle of expanding frost, I heard a rustling sound. It came from the garbage in front of me, though my eyes had spotted nothing move. Then came the grinding sound of metal on stone, and trash shifted. The mausoleum door opened an inch or two outward, and trash shifted some more. I almost took a dump in my pants. Standing so fast I almost fell down the icy steps, I scrambled out of the vestibule and backed off a safe distance. I heard the sound of metal on stone again, accompanied by the squeak of old, rusty hinges, and more rustling. My mind raced the possibilities. In the lead was a homeless person, using the crypt for shelter. Second was a caretaker, or cemetery official. Third up was a neighborhood kid, or random stranger, using the place for some unknown purpose. Maybe a runaway. But how'd any of them get past the trash? It could probably be done, but it would take special effort and foresight to make sure the trash fell back to cover your tracks every time you used the door. Maybe there was another way into the crypt. None of us had ever tried to get in there. We didn't see the need for breaking and entering. The same went for all the other crypts in the place, the old caretaker's shack, and all the other outbuildings that looked like they were never used. We weren't like that. We were happy to be able to use the out-of-doors property as is. That didn't mean someone else didn't have the desire to break in and steal something, though. My eyes rested on the dark rectangle that led into the Stockton mausoleum as my feet continued to put distance between me and the trash-littered vestibule. With a rustle and clank of discarded beer cans, a dark shape emerged. At first, I thought it was a dog. That didn't make much sense unless someone was with the dog. How else could it work the door? Then the shape stood on 2 feet and howled. It was all I could do now to not shit my pants. I realized then I'd seen this thing before at the strip mall years ago. This thing, or one like it. For some reason that made me a little less scared, but not for long. Any urge to slow my flight away from this horror had no chance of lengthy existence. I was afraid to take my eyes off the thing. Fortunately, the area was familiar. I had spent enough time here in the past to know every lump or hole in the turf. I could negotiate it with my eyes closed. I kept moving backward across the frost-covered ground between Johnson Howard Martin and Chester Frank Fields as the thing turned its head toward me. Its eyes glinted in the moonlight, eyes set in a dog's head. The damn thing had a snout like a German shepherd from hell. Somehow, as my mind grappled with this sight, my feet moved with a mind of their own. Communicating with the map in my head, they found the way between Rose Pearl Williams' massive and ornate granite monument and the simpler headstone of a modest Charles Benworth Anthony. I should have been content with the slow and steady escape. A plan came to mind, and I ducked behind Rose Pearl's monument and put everything I had into my legs, intent on rocketing home. All I did was make a good imitation of Scooby-Doo running from a villain. Recovering as fast as my adrenaline-drenched body could, I scrambled to my feet and ran. The sound of snarling grew louder behind my back, and I could almost feel claws ripping me apart any moment as I dodged between trees, zigzagged through monuments, and ran down aisles of headstones. Tumbling down a snow-frosted hill, I slammed into the base of the perimeter fence. I was too far from the entrance we usually used, a conveniently cracked set of bars next to a masonry pylon. That didn't stop me. Primitive primate instinct took hold. After dragging myself over the spear points at the top of the iron fence, that primate instinct seemed to run its course, and I fell heavily on the other side, landing in a patch of frozen grass next to the sidewalk. Unfazed, I bolted home. I told the guys what I saw the next day. They didn't believe me, of course, but when I freaked out about having to get weapons to kill this thing, they started to come around. I showed them my wounds, the marks on my hands and scrapes on legs and belly from the fence. The tipping point came when I almost had to physically fight them to stop them from going out there just to look around. Not without weapons. No way. Not after what I saw. We waited until dark. We discussed going in the day, but that would be way too obvious. Someone would see, and we'd have the police to contend with. And then, no more party hangout. That would suck big time. With multiple flashlights and lighters for making fire, and a few other things like baseball bats, a crowbar, hatchets, hammers, and knives, I felt more confident. It was 4 against 1, and we weren't little kids anymore, afraid of shadows. We were armed and ready. While we waited for dark, we watched Chuck Norris movies and talked ourselves up real good. I had planned to get one of my dad's guns, but there wasn't a good time to get into the gun cabinet on such short notice without making it obvious. I found myself regretting that more and more the closer we got to the cemetery. Then we were past the fence and creeping toward our secret place as silently as possible. It was freezing cold, yet not enough snow had fallen during the day to make a difference. There were tracks visible behind the trees, but we couldn't make out any specific prints. I was glad to see the tracks, mostly to sober up my companions, who had begun to act like this was just some regular party trip. Their attitude changed at once. They were convinced it was a homeless guy or a criminal, maybe a neighborhood kid who was new or something like that. And they were convinced there was another way into the Stocktons' crypt. I wondered about this too, so it was a unanimous decision to spend a few minutes looking around for another way inside. We circled the mausoleum. I know I've been calling the thing a crypt, but technically, the crypt is the part inside a mausoleum or church, under the floor, where the deceased are kept. The Stockton Mausoleum jutted out from the side of a small hill. The facade was featureless, composed of flat gray stone slabs that overlapped in symmetrical scales that were not unpleasing to the eye. The ground at the front of this intentionally sobering masonry edifice had been scooped away and fitted with stone or concrete stairs leading down into the earth to a sturdy iron door of minimal embellishment. Garbage littered the area. It was from where I'd been digging around, but I didn't remember tossing it about like this. We circled the hill, poking around, looking for holes or openings, and found none in the Stockton Mausoleum. There were other constructions nearby, and we checked them out too, on a hunch. Nearby stood a maintenance shed, sheathed in stone so that it fit the aesthetics of the place, at least superficially. The expense it must have taken to do this reminded me again of how this cemetery, at one time, had been the place for the well-to-do and connected to spend eternity. Whatever prestige could be found in death, apparently could be found here, at least in the past, when someone looked after the place, when someone cared. We sometimes wondered why this place was deserted. The official story that we had heard, of course, was that it was full No more room for additional stiffs. With no vacancies, attrition resulted with the passage of time. Fewer and fewer people cared to make a visit to the graveside of those interred at Stonewood Hills. It was still curious why they let the place go to hell like this. The land itself represented a sizable investment, let alone the one-of-a-kind architecture scattered throughout the sculpted hills. At any rate, we were glad it was available for our purposes. Maybe we felt like we'd become the caretakers of this place. Maybe that was why we pushed in the door so readily and stepped inside the masonry maintenance shed without so much as a pause. A million thoughts went through my head as we passed through the door. I held my crowbar high, ready to smash the skull of anything that came at me. Our flashlights stabbed the dark, illuminating dusty shelves lining the walls of a single room filled with collapsing containers of pesticide and fertilizer. An old riding lawnmower sat in the middle of the room. Rusty tools hung from the walls. A layer of dust and filth and cobwebs formed a second skin over everything. Tracks on the floor led to a piece of moldering plywood on the floor at the far side of the room. Pushing the plywood aside revealed a hole roughly 3 feet across, leading to a void on the other side. No cobwebs showed in the opening. "Shit," Gary said. Silence descended upon us for a moment as we listened for I don't know what. Maybe for breathing on the other side of the hole. We heard nothing. "Anyone want to go in there?" Bob finally asked. "Fuck that shit," seemed to be the consensus. The 4 of us inched closer nonetheless. Bob held his hatchet ready and pointed his flashlight down the throat of the opening. It was one of those mag lights with like half a dozen D-cell batteries inside. "I see the bottom. It's about 5 feet down," he said, angling the flashlight around. "It goes that way," he added, tilting his head in the direction of the Stocktons' piece of heaven. Heart pounding, I looked down into the hole. Sure enough, 6 or 7 feet down was a floor of compacted earth. "Shit," Gary said again. "I don't want to go in there. We don't have to go in there, do we?" I didn't know what to say. "Let's burn the fucker out," Tom suggested. Since the thought of going into that tunnel turned our collective spines to silly putty, a fact none of us wanted to admit, and we weren't about to give up, we made a quick trip to the gas station a few blocks away. We returned a short time later with a gallon of gasoline. We broke up the workbench and pulled the wooden shelves off the walls. After tossing the wood in the hole, Bob added a good splash of gas to the pile. Then we dropped in a match. There was a whoosh, and flames jetted out of the hole. For an instant I thought we were going to set the shack on fire, but the flames retreated and started blowing in the other direction, into the tunnel carried by a draft we hadn't even started to consider. Satisfied, we ran to the Stockton mausoleum. We could smell the smoke before we got there. Thankfully, we saw no flames leaking out of the ground anywhere, but the smell of that smoke had to be thick in the tunnel. If there was anything down there, it wasn't going to stick around. If it could get out, it surely would. And the only question was, where? We were counting on the door in our garbage pit, but discovering the other entrance meant there could be more entrances or exits. I had more than a shred of doubt. I mean, how could we be positive the tunnel we found really led to the Stockton mausoleum? We couldn't. This doubt evaporated when I saw wisps of smoke rising from the upper edge of the iron door in the garbage pit. My grip on the crowbar grew tighter. More smoke belched out in waves as the door shuddered and moved, pushing through years of accumulated trash. There was a loud and violent rustling sound. The thing stepped free of the garbage and leaped to the top of the stairs in one powerful movement. It looked even bigger than it did before. It howled, and in that moment I heard the splash of urine from the owners of 4 terrified bladders, and all at once our resolve melted like butter in a flame. Empty bravado. Fake. This was real. I don't remember if anyone else screamed, but I did. The crowbar in my hand felt like a toy. I was an idiot. I was a fool for talking my friends into this, and now we were gonna get killed. Then, in mid-howl, this thing coughed. Spasms racked its chest. Recovering quickly, it snarled at us, then coughed again. It staggered and ran off. We stood there, staring at each other a moment, and then we heard the sirens. They grew louder. We ran. Halfway to the exit we knew so well, we noticed flashing police lights at the front gate. Someone across the street must have called them after spotting flashlights in what should have been a quiet and deserted piece of vacant property. Anyway, the police clearly had no way to get inside, as the gate was locked with a heavy chain, and no one seemed to be in a hurry to meet them. If there was a caretaker, he was taking his time. Without discussion, we made our way for the exit we always used. All of us wanted to get to a private place to process what we just experienced, get a fresh change of pants and underwear, and maybe cry a little. The break-in at the cemetery made the news the next day. It was quickly forgotten by most people and faded from national prominence within a week, even after certain details emerged. As time went by, however, we put together a fuller story from bits and pieces of rumors that flew around town. It was improbable as it was frightening. First, the facts as reported in the newspaper. The cemetery had become a center for area hooligans and the homeless. All manner of illegal activities were going on, including fencing stolen goods, drug use and dealing, dog fighting, illegal encampment, and even murder. Human remains had been found in the Stockton mausoleum, remains that did not belong there. Missing Marky had been found. In time, rumors fleshed out the story, mostly from relatives of police detectives who had worked on the case, and people who knew someone who had a friend who knew someone that worked at the cemetery. It's hard to say what's true and what's embellishment, but I'll lay it out in a pile and you can straighten it out. According to some, an underworld dog-fighting ring was using the mausoleum and crypt for raising and training dogs for fighting. More than a ton of dog feces was removed, along with bones from hundreds of animals. Human bones were found in this collection. Part of the mausoleum had collapsed and tunnels were dug in the hill and around it. These tunnels went all over the cemetery. The tunnels extended under the nearby neighborhood and went for miles before ending in sections of collapsed dirt and debris. The government brought in Special Forces advisors to aid the police. That last bit is true. I know that for a fact, since I was working at a flea-bitten motel as a houseman at the time. A dozen uniformed military personnel took up residence there for a week, and none of them would speak to anyone outside of their group unless it was to order room service or extra towels or blankets. They never used the amenities, and they clammed up quick whenever I got close during the course of my duties. I'll never know exactly what happened at the cemetery, but I will never forget what I saw illuminated in our flashlight beams that night. That face was evil, the face of a mutant dog, or a werewolf, or some other kind of awful thing, part man, part animal, part wolf, or dog. A true beast from hell, and it was ready to kill. If you liked today's story, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, click that bell, and you'll be notified right away when I put up a new episode of Dogman Bites